In the shadow of the great baobab tree, where children played and elders gathered to tell stories of the old gods, Kwame's name was often spoken, but never kindly. He was a man of 32, with weathered skin that spoke of years under the relentless African sun. His hands, calloused from labor, told the story of a man who tried and failed, time and time again, to tame the unforgiving earth. Kwame was born to humble beginnings. His father had been a farmer, a man whose back was bent not by age, but by the weight of poverty. His mother, a devout woman, prayed daily for blessings that never came. When they passed, leaving Kwame an orphan at 16, he inherited nothing but their broken tools and a plot of barren land. The villagers pitied him at first, offering kind words and the occasional loaf of bread. But as the years went on and Kwame's fortunes failed to change, pity turned to disdain. The children mocked him openly, pointing at his patched clothes and bare feet as he trudged through the village. The adults whispered behind his back, calling him cursed. "Why doesn't he leave?" they would ask. "Surely the spirits have abandoned him." But Kwame had nowhere to go. The land, though unyielding, was his only inheritance, and he clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man holding on to a piece of driftwood. One fateful evening, after another scorching day in the fields, Kwame sat in his empty hut, staring at a single clay pot of water. His stomach growled from hunger, but he had nothing to eat. The last of his goats had been taken by a prowling hyena the night before, and the crops he had painstakingly planted months ago had withered under the relentless sun. The loneliness weighed on him like a physical burden. He thought of the villagers with their laughter and their families, and a bitter wave of resentment washed over him. "I am tired," he whispered to himself. "Tired of trying, tired of failing." Without thinking, Kwame rose and left his hut, the door creaking as it swung shut behind him. The moon hung low in the sky, its light casting an eerie glow over the landscape. His feet carried him down a winding path, through the tall grass that whispered secrets to the wind. The path ended at the river, a place the villagers rarely ventured after sunset. The elders spoke of spirits that lingered there, both benevolent and malevolent. It was said that the river could grant your deepest desires, or take your life if you dared to cross it. Kwame didn't care. He knelt by the water's edge, his reflection staring back at him with hollow eyes. The cool air from the river kissed his skin, but it did little to soothe the storm inside him. "Why must I suffer?" he murmured, his voice cracking. "What have I done to deserve this life? If the spirits are listening, take me now. I have nothing left to give." As his words faded into the night, the river grew unnaturally still. The gentle ripples ceased, and the air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. "Do not speak of giving up," a voice said, soft and melodic. Kwame froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked up and gasped. Standing in the water before him was a woman. No, a creature of such beauty that his breath caught in his throat. Her skin glistened like polished obsidian, and her eyes sparkled with the light of 1,000 stars. Her hair, long and flowing, cascaded over her shoulders like a river of midnight. But what held his gaze most was the faint shimmer of scales where her legs should have been. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I am Nyanja," she replied, her voice as soothing as the river's current. "Guardian of these waters. I have heard your cries, felt your sorrow. Tell me, why do you wish to abandon this life?" For a moment Kwame couldn't speak. The air around her seemed to hum with power, and he felt both awe and fear in her presence. But the weight of his despair overpowered his caution. Slowly, haltingly, he began to speak. He told her of his struggles, the endless toil that bore no fruit. He spoke of the villagers' scorn, the nights spent alone in his hut, the hunger that gnawed at his belly. As he spoke, his voice cracked, and tears he had held back for years spilled down his cheeks. When he finished, Nyanja regarded him with a look that was both tender and solemn. Your pain is great, she said softly. But your story does not have to end here. What if I told you that your life could change? That you could have wealth, respect, and everything your heart desires? Kwam's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. How? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nyanja's expression grew serious. I will grant you these things, but there is a price. You must take me as your wife and love me as you would a human woman. In return, I will give you a life of abundance. But there is one condition. You must never reveal my true nature to anyone. If you break this promise, all that I give you will vanish, and your life will be forfeit. Kwame stared at her, his mind racing. A part of him hesitated. This woman was no ordinary being, and her offer seemed too good to be true. But what choice did he have? Desperation overshadowed his doubts. I accept, he said finally, his voice steady. Nyanja smiled, a radiant yet mysterious smile. Then it is done. She extended her hand, and as Kwame took it, a surge of energy rippled through the air. She stepped out of the water, and before Kwame's astonished eyes, her shimmering tail transformed into two perfectly formed legs. Let us begin our life together, she said, her voice a melody that lingered in the night air. The changes in Kwame's life were immediate and extraordinary. The once barren land he toiled on became fertile overnight, sprouting crops so abundant that he could hardly believe his eyes. Villagers flocked to his fields, marveling at the bounty. But it didn't stop there. Gold coins began appearing in his hut, first a small pile, then enough to fill entire sacks. With his newfound wealth, Kwame built a grand mansion on the outskirts of the village, a sprawling estate with marble floors, intricate carvings, and fountains that sparkled under the sun. Nyanja, now his wife, became the talk of the village. Her beauty and grace were unmatched, and though she rarely ventured out, the villagers who caught glimpses of her spoke of her as if she were a goddess. But she remained an enigma. She avoided the heat of the sun and spent hours in the mansion's vast, cool bathing chambers. Whenever villagers questioned her reclusive nature, Kwame would smile and say, "She prefers the cool." A year after their marriage, Nyanja gave birth to a son. They named him Chikandi, meaning love, for he was the embodiment of the bond they shared. The child was extraordinary, with skin that glowed softly in the sunlight, and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages. Kwame doted on his son, his heart swelling with pride every time he held him. For the first time in his life, he felt truly complete. News of Kwame's newfound success reached his mother in her distant village. She arrived unannounced one day, eager to see the life her son had built and to meet her grandson. At first, she was overjoyed. The mansion, the servants, the lavish meals. It was more than she had ever dreamed for her son. She doted on Chikandi, marveling at his beauty and intelligence. But as the days passed, she began to notice oddities. The mansion was quiet, save for the faint sound of water echoing from the bathing chambers. Kwame's mother, Abini, stood outside the door, her curiosity growing unbearable. Nyanja had been in the bath for hours, as she often was, but today, Abini could no longer suppress her suspicions. The villagers had warned her. There is something strange about your son's wife, they had whispered. She is too beautiful, too perfect, and why does she avoid the sun? Abini had laughed it off at first, choosing to revel in the joy of seeing her son prosperous and happy after years of suffering. But as the days passed, the oddities became harder to ignore. Nyanja's habits were peculiar, her love for the cool, her aversion to heat, the hours she spent in the bath. And then there was Chikandi, her grandson, whose luminous skin and wise eyes made her wonder if he, too, was touched by something otherworldly. Enough, Abini whispered to herself. I must know the truth. With a firm hand, she pushed open the door to the bathing chamber. The sight that greeted her made her gasp, her knees threatening to buckle. Nyanja sat in the massive stone tub, her back turned to the door. But it was not the smooth human back that Abini expected to see. Instead, shimmering scales covered her lower body, glistening under the dim light. Her tail, long and elegant, moved lazily through the water, sending ripples across its surface. Nyanja turned at the sound of the door creaking open. Her eyes met Abini's, wide with shock and fear. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them seemed to hum with tension, thick and suffocating. What? What are you? Abini finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling. What is this? Nyanja rose slowly from the tub, the water cascading off her glistening form. As she stepped onto the tiled floor, her tail transformed into legs before Abini's astonished eyes. I am what you see, Nyanja said, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. I am a mermaid, a guardian of the river. Your son knows this, and he has accepted me for who I am. Abini staggered back, her hand clutching the doorframe for support. You mean to tell me my son married a creature, and he knew? Nyanja nodded, her gaze steady. We made a pact. I gave him the life he dreamed of, wealth, respect, a child. In return, he promised to keep my secret. Abini stormed out of the bathroom, her mind racing. She found Kwame in the living room, cradling Chikandi in his arms. The sight of her son, so serene and proud, only fueled her anger. Kwame! She shouted, her voice echoing through the grand hall. Kwame looked up, startled. Mother, what's wrong? What's wrong? Abini repeated, her voice rising. Do you know what your wife is? Do you know what kind of monster you've brought into this house? Kwame's expression shifted, his calm demeanor replaced by a grim resolve. He handed Chikandi to a servant and stood, facing his mother. I know exactly what she is, he said quietly. Abini stared at him, her mouth agape. You knew? And you still married her? You've put us all in danger. What if she turns on you, on your son? She would never harm us, Kwame said firmly. She has given me everything, Mother. The land, the mansion, the wealth. You think this came from luck? It was her. Abini shook her head, disbelief etched into her features. This is madness. You cannot stay with her. You must end this unholy union, before it's too late. Kwame stepped closer, his voice low but unwavering. If I break my promise to her, I will lose everything. The land will wither, the mansion will crumble, the wealth will vanish, and I will die. Abini froze, the weight of his words sinking in. Kwame took a deep breath, his eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. There is more, he said. If you tell anyone what you've seen, the same fate will befall you. This is the price of her gift. Abini's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of a chair. So you've tied yourself to this creature, and now you've tied me as well? I made a choice, Mother, Kwame said softly, and I will honor it. Nyanja has done nothing but love me and our son. Whatever she is my wife. Abini sank into the chair, her face pale. For a long moment she said nothing, the silence heavy between them. Finally, she looked up at her son, her eyes filled with both fear and sorrow. And if she ever turns against you? What then? Kwame shook his head. She won't. But if she does, that is my burden to bear. The days that followed were strained. Abini avoided Nyanja whenever possible, her fear and distrust evident in every glance. Nyanja, for her part, remained calm and composed, her every action a testament to her love for Kwame and Chikandi. But the tension in the house was palpable. Abini's presence disrupted the delicate balance, her mistrust like a storm cloud hovering over the family. Kwame found himself caught in the middle, torn between the mother who had raised him and the wife who had saved him. He tried to ease the tension, but the rift only. Outside the mansion, the villagers began to notice Abini's change in demeanor. Once proud and jubilant about her son's newfound fortune, she now seemed withdrawn, her face lined with worry. "What troubles you, Mama Kwame?" they would ask. But Abini would only shake her head, her lips pressed tightly together. She dared not speak of what she had seen, the memory of Nyanja's shimmering tail haunting her every thought. The mansion, once a sanctuary of prosperity and love, became a house of unspoken truths and mounting tension. Abini's unease grew each day, and with it, her determination to protect her son, no matter the cost. She avoided Nyanja, but her fear of the mermaid's nature was like a festering wound, coloring every thought and action. Nyanja noticed the change, though she said nothing. She continued to care for Chikandi, her love for him and Kwame unwavering. But in the quiet moments, when she sat by the window watching the river in the distance, a shadow of sadness would cross her face. Kwame, caught between his mother and his wife, felt the weight of their silent battle pressing on his shoulders. He tried to mediate, but Abini's distrust of Nyanja had taken root too deeply. "Mother," he said one evening, as they sat alone in the grand living room, "you have to let this go. Nyanja has done nothing to harm you." Abini's lips tightened. "You don't understand, Kwame. She's not like us. She doesn't belong here. One day her true nature will reveal itself, and it will be too late to protect you." Kwame sighed, his frustration barely contained. "Her true nature is the reason we have this life. You think the gods blessed us out of pity? Everything we have is because of her." "And at what cost?" Abini shot back. "Your soul? Your humanity? Do you even know what she's capable of?" Kwame stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "Enough, Mother. I made my choice, and I will not abandon her. Not for you, not for anyone." Abini watched him leave, her heart heavy with both anger and sorrow. The villagers, who had long whispered about Kwame's sudden rise to fortune, began to notice Abini's change in demeanor. She no longer walked through the marketplace with the pride of a mother whose son had achieved greatness. Instead, she seemed withdrawn, her eyes darting nervously as if weighed down by a secret too heavy to bear. "Mama Kwame," one of the older women said one day, pulling her aside. "What troubles you? Is it your son? His wife?" Abini hesitated, the words on the tip of her tongue. She wanted to confide in someone, to unburden herself of the terrifying truth she had witnessed, but Kwame's warning echoed in her mind. "If you tell anyone, you will die." "No," she said finally, forcing a smile. "Everything is fine." The woman narrowed her eyes, but said nothing more. Still, the whispers grew louder. "Why does Kwame's wife never leave the mansion?" they asked. "Why does she never join the women in the market or at the river?" "She must think she's too good for us," one said. "Or maybe there's something she's hiding," another added. The seeds of suspicion began to sprout, and the villagers' curiosity turned into quiet resentment. Inside the mansion, Nyanja felt the weight of the villagers' whispers and Abini's distrust. She stayed within the cool confines of the house, avoiding the sunlit gardens and the bustling marketplace. One afternoon, as she bathed Chikandi in a small tub in their room, she glanced at Kwame, who sat nearby. "Your mother hates me," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of sadness. Kwame looked up, startled. "She doesn't hate you," he said quickly, though the words felt hollow. "She does," Nyanja said, her gaze fixed on their son. "I see it in her eyes. She fears me, and she resents what I've brought into your life." Kwame stood and crossed the room, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's not you she resents, Nyanja. It's the unknown. She doesn't understand what we have, and that frightens her." Nyanja turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Do you regret choosing me?" Kwame knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Never. You gave me everything I ever dreamed of. I will protect you and our son, no matter what." But even as he spoke, he couldn't ignore the growing tension between his wife and his mother. Abini couldn't shake the memory of Nyanja's shimmering tail, the sight of her transformation etched into her mind. Her fear for Kwame's safety grew with each passing day, and she began to wonder if there was a way to break the bond between him and Nyanja. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sought out the village elder, a wise woman named Adisa, known for her knowledge of the old ways. "Elder Adisa," Abini said, her voice trembling, "I need your guidance. Suppose someone made a pact with a being from the river. Is there a way to undo it?" Adisa's eyes narrowed. "What kind of being, Abini? Speak plainly." Abini hesitated, the words caught in her throat. "A mermaid," she whispered finally. Adisa's expression grew grave. "A mermaid? You speak of dangerous things, child. Such creatures are not to be trifled with. Their promises are binding, and their wrath is deadly. Why do you ask?" Abini's hands trembled in her lap. "It's my son. He's tied to one of them. I fear for his soul, for his life." Adisa leaned back, her gaze piercing. "If your son has made a pact, there is no undoing it without great cost. To break such a bond is to invite ruin, not just for him, but for all connected to him." Abini's heart sank, her desperation mounting. "There must be something I can do," she pleaded. Adisa shook her head. "The only way to sever such a bond is if the creature herself chooses to release him. But why would she, if she has given him everything?" Abini left Adisa's hut with a heavy heart. As she walked through the darkened village, her mind churned with possibilities. She couldn't confront Nyanja directly. The mermaid's power was too great. But perhaps there was another way. That night, as the mansion lay silent, Abini began to plan. If she couldn't break the bond, she would have to find a way to expose Nyanja's true nature to the villagers. Surely, once they saw what she was, they would demand her departure. But deep down, a sliver of fear gnawed at Abini. If she acted against Nyanja, would the mermaid's wrath consume her family? For days, the mansion remained a tense battleground, the silence between Nyanja and Abini growing heavier. Kwame noticed the change, but chose to focus on his work, hoping the tension would resolve itself. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that the fragile peace was unsustainable. Abini's mistrust, Nyanja's isolation, and the villagers' growing suspicions were a volatile combination, threatening to shatter the life Kwame had fought so hard to build. And beneath it all, the river waited, its waters calm and still, hiding secrets that could change everything. If you liked this story, make sure you like and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on your notifications for more exciting stories like this by E.